What really happens, when world leaders gather for these high-stakes summits and what's actually said behind closed doors, or maybe just on the sidelines, that's kind of what we're here to unpack today. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission, like always, is to take the sources you send us, and this time it's some really interesting excerpts from a YouTube transcript about a G7 summit and related political commentary. We try to cut through the noise, distill the core claims, find the factual counterpoints, and look at the analyses presented right there in the material itself.
Exactly. And today we're diving into some, well, pretty specific and honestly often surprising statements. They're attributed to a prominent political figure during the G7. And we'll also look at how the source observes his past actions and what it claims the consequences were.
Right. The goal here is to give you a shortcut, really, to being well informed, to help you grasp the exact claims being made, the specific context the source itself is providing, and, why these particular details might stand out. As we go through this, you'll get to consider multiple perspectives, but all offered within the source material. Hopefully that leads to some aha moments for you.
Definitely. We'll be navigating through claims about the G7 structure, Russia's role, which pretty controversial, also how responsibility for international conflicts gets attributed, and even, yeah, a really unique grievance about a military parade and, believe it or not, the weather forecast. It's quite a path the source takes us down, connecting these seemingly disparate threads.
Okay, let's get into it then. So the source jumps right into a claim about the G7's history. The political figure states, and I'm pulling this quote directly from the transcript provided, the G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. And then he suggests this was a mistake because, well, in his view, you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in. So what's the context? What does our source provide on that specific point?
Well, what's really interesting is the source immediately gives a direct counterpoint right away.
Yeah.
It highlights that Russia was part of the G7 back when it was the G8, but only up until 2014. The material explicitly states Russia was kicked out for invading Ukraine and annexing Crimea back then. That action, significantly reshaped global alliances. So the very reason Russia isn't in the G7 now, according to the source's account anyway, is precisely because of actions that led to war, not, the absence of Russia somehow preventing one.
Wow, okay. That's quite a twist right there. And the commentary in the source really emphasizes the irony, doesn't it? It observes when Trump says that Russia wouldn't be in a war with Ukraine if they were in the G7, he's literally explaining the reason that they are not currently in the G7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it paints this picture of the figure maybe seeing himself as, quoting the source here, Vladimir Putin's little messenger boy, basically advocating for Putin on the world stage.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the source expresses, well, clear confusion about the stance. It asks why someone who swept into office amid promises of enacting an America First agenda would then be, quote, whining that some other country that isn't the United States of America isn't represented in an international body. The commentary really asks, why is he so focused on serving Putin instead of U.S. interests? That seems to be a key takeaway from the source. It's not just about the historical facts, but trying to understand the value's priorities, or at least how the source sees them. Okay, that G7 point, it really sets up a particular line of reasoning in the source material. It then takes us further, connecting this pattern of thought, maybe, to the figure's claims about who's responsible for other global conflicts. How does the source build that argument?
Well, it continues by highlighting that this same political figure also claims the war in Ukraine never would have happened if he had been in office in 2022. So he's effectively blaming Joe Biden for it. And this raises, an important question about consistency, applying logic consistently. The source points out that this figure seems to view all foreign wars as the fault of the American president who was in office at the time they broke out.
Right. So if that's his stated logic, what does the source then do with that when it looks at other conflicts?
Well, the commentary immediately flips that logic back onto the figure himself. It uses his own attributed reasoning. It basically says, okay, if that's the rule, then the recent Iran-Israel war, which saw a major escalation, that would then be his fault, since he was the American president when that specific conflict erupted. The source concludes that by his own logic as presented, he would be completely in ownership of it. It really highlights what the source sees as an inconsistency in how responsibility is assigned. It feels like the source is scrutinizing not just the claims, but the whole framework of blame itself.
And then it gets even more granular, almost personal, with the grievances mentioned. The source highlights what it calls an embarrassing moment, detailing how the political figure was reportedly, well, quite fixated on a rain forecast. for a military parade in Washington, D.C. that never actually happened. The rain, I mean. The source quotes the commentary saying the figure was uh, still butthurt over the fact that the forecast called for rain and had apparently wanted this massive crowd, like 250,000 people.
It is quite specific, isn't it? Very specific detail. The source explains that the forecast had predicted a 100% chance of rain, but then it didn't rain at all. And according to the commentary, this led the figure to uh, convince himself that there was some grand conspiracy by, I guess, big weather is the phrase used, to suppress his crowd by wrongly forecasting rain.
Mm-hmm.
So the source uses this anecdote, really, to show how these deeply personal feelings, even about something like a weather forecast, can become a recurring theme in his public narrative, with the weather forecasters becoming the scapegoats for, a perceived lack of adoring fans.
Okay, wow. So we've definitely covered quite a range here. Claims, counter-narratives from the source. What does this all add up to? For the broader narrative our source is presenting about this political figure, how does the commentary tie these different events together in the end?
Well, the source really does weave them all together. It tries to paint a picture of a, quote, pretty fast downward trajectory for the political figure. It explicitly lists several factors it sees contributing. His fallout with Elon Musk, a proposed budget bill that the source calls disastrous, claiming it would strip health care from 14 million Americans and explode the deficits to the tune of trillions. That's quite a claim. Also, a failed trade war, this new war between Israel and Iran, the empty military parade in D.C., and ultimately sinking poll numbers as a result of all of that. So the course concludes, it's, quote, little surprised that the crash out continues overseas at the G7. It's essentially suggesting these personal issues and perceived failures are now spilling over onto the international stage during these high-level meetings.
So yeah, we've navigated through quite an array of claims and counter-narratives today, all directly from the source material you provided. From that intricate history of the G7, Russia's exclusion, the logic applied to global conflicts, sometimes nuanced, sometimes maybe contradictory according to the source, and even down to that really intense personal frustration over a weather forecast affecting a parade.
Yeah, we've definitely seen how the source connects these things that seem pretty disparate at first. It uses them to paint that broader picture of a fast downward trajectory, citing those specific elements we just mentioned, the Musk fallout, the budget bill concerns, trade war, poll numbers.
Right. So considering all of that from the source, it makes you wonder, what does it mean when a public figure's personal grievances, like, this perceived slight from big weather impacting a hoped-for crowd of 250,000? What does it mean when those things become a recurring theme right alongside discussions of international relations and geopolitical responsibility? What does that prompt you, the listener, to consider about that intersection between individual personality and global leadership?
It certainly gives you a unique lens, doesn't it? A different way to look at the dynamics of these summits and the public personas of world leaders.
Absolutely. Well, as always, we hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective and some solid takeaways pulled directly from the source material you shared with us. Keep sending those sources our way, and we'll keep unpacking them for you.